Hello there, so it is that time of the month again. It is the SAT month, guys, and at least we have a week before the actual exam. So I am guessing some students, as usual at this point, are getting just frantic. They are beating themselves up or scared that they're not confident enough. So if you're one of those students and you're watching this video right now, relax, I have got you covered, because in this video today I'm going to be taking a walk through a more recent SAT practice question. I'll be looking at all the major reading comprehension questions as well as some standard English convention questions. So if you make the most of this video, you could just be walking into the exam hall in a week's time with a lot more confidence than you can imagine. So I want to encourage at this point, grab your writing materials, cut through your files from some questions. If you have my workbook, lucky you, and get ready for an important ride to help you slay the verbal section of the SAT. So the first question we have here is a vocabulary in context question. You're supposed to fill in the blank such that the word you're using to fill up the blank logically completes the text, right, and maintains the story. So what do? We just read around the blank and pick up our clues, and our clues can be punctuation marks, they could be words around the blank, and they could also be pronouns that point you back to their antecedent. So obviously for this question we have here, we have a pronoun before the blank. So I'm already asking, what is this pronoun referring to? So this has to be pointing to a previously made definition or an adjective somewhere mentioned earlier in the text. Now let's see. On the basis of extensive calculations and models, astronomers in the 1990s predicted that the collision of two neutron stars or a neutron star and a black hole could release a massive burst of gamma rays in an event called kilonova. So what we have here is this prediction. Astronomers predicted that there could be some sort of bursting, right? And when I have this dash was confirmed. So obviously my best option should be that word predicted. Yes, this prediction was confirmed because it takes a prediction, a guess, a conjecture to be confirmed, right? And if I put in my prediction in the blank, it makes perfect sense. So what makes sense in line with the word prediction from the options? What is synonymous with that word prediction from the options? The next thing you want to do. Theory makes sense. Theory can be somebody's speculation, somebody's prediction or conjecture. That works. Evidence, no. This evidence was confirmed, no. And evidence is called an evidence itself because it is a confirmation in itself. So this is a contradicting answer. This constant, it sounds more like a verb, right, than the noun that we want it to be. So it's not working. This experiment was confirmed. The predicted, there was no experiment conducted. So if you plug that in, it also doesn't work. So you see, what is the best answer for that question? The next question, right, is another kind of vocabulary in context, but for this kind, the same trick applies, except that this time when you're reading the information around the underlined word to get the context. So you have to get the storyline, right? And be sure that the meaning of the word, the first meaning of the word works in that storyline. Sometimes the first meaning of a word does not work in a certain context as it will work if the word was standing on its own. So the word clear here means clear, undoubtable, right? It can also mean crystal, right? So, but let me see how it works in this context. So I will read the information without it. The water was so dash, I will put that as a blank already. The water was so whatever that it was almost invisible. And when we floated slowly out over the plants and fishes, we seemed to be miraculously sustained in the air while exploring a veritable fairyland. So the water has to be a certain kind of way that makes it impossible not to even notice that it is water. So this word invisible is a pointer, and they floated out slowly, and it seemed like a miraculous kind of situation. So the water is more or less something you cannot notice, right? So you can't say the water was simple. That does not explain the idea of invisibility. Understandable, of course, doesn't make any logical sense to describe water as understandable, right? Obvious, the water was so obvious that it was invisible. See how contradicting that is. If the water is obvious, it wouldn't be invisible then. So the water transparent, the clarity of the water. And in a way, the first meaning of the word clear suffices for this answer. Like the first meaning of the word clear, which means crisp, which means undoubtable, obvious, and transparent too. Yes, just works in this case. So yeah, we are much in luck. Let's move on to another question type. Oh, there's a new question type here. This is a function of the underlined question, where you're required to, of course, begin by understanding the underlined information, that you plug it into the context. So you read the underline, understand the underline, and put it into the context of the overall passage. So you have to read the overall passage as well and connect the underline logically. The question is asking you, why did the author say this at this point? So you must pay attention to logic. So the information around that underlined would determine why that underlined word was put there in the first place. So we should also look at the blurb. This person is discussing her home life. So there are key details from here: discussion of home life. And however she discusses her home life, it could either be positive or negative, right? So let's see. In California, we heated our houses by building fires. So the idea of building fires. And the underline itself has gives us, fires said we were home, we had drawn the circle, we were safe through the night. This fire is used in a personifying sense here, right? But I can see that this sort of depicts the comfort of fire. Remember, from before that underlined information, we had they heated their houses with fires, and they built fires even on summer evenings because the fall came in. So the environment is sort of cold, and they needed the comfort that the fire provided. And you should notice the word choices as used by the fire in this case. Fire said we were home, we had drawn the circle, we were safe through the night. So this is sort of the fire playing the role of a human being in providing comfort in the midst of cold. That is my prediction. Now let's look at the options. Option A said it illustrates that the fire provides comfort beyond physical warmth. This makes a lot of sense. Comfort. Fire providing comfort, illustrating the idea of fire providing comfort. We want to hold on to that. Beyond physical warmth. Yes, that idea of we had drawn the circle, we were safe. Fire said we were home. So this depicts the idea of more or less a mother welcoming you home. So I can get that idea of comfort provided beyond physical warmth here. Option B is summarizing the information that came before in the text. So what information do we have before it in the text? This is the information we have before it in the text, right? Now, would you say that underlined summarize that information? Of course not. The underlined, in fact, is illustrating the earlier two sentences. It is not summarizing the previous sentence. Option C, it explains that the house remains cold. Of course, the house cannot remain cold. This answer is a contradicting answer because the fire provides warmth from what we just predicted. So this is wrong. It suggests that the author feels comfortable in her home with or without fire. No, she wouldn't feel comfortable without the fire because the environment, obviously, from what we see in the text, is cold and the fire provides warmth. So you see, we have two contradicting answers, C and D, and option B cannot be justified, totally off the context. So option A is the best in the list, providing comfort, just like I predicted. Let's deal with another of these sort of questions that require us to find the function of the underlined, right? We did this in a literary passage, and remember, if you've been following my previous videos, I've emphasized that you don't treat the literary passages in the same manner as you would treat the usual science-based passages, right? So I had to understand how we deal with this one that is science-based, right? The underlined as we have here is this: a chemical compound usable as a detergent. This is provided in brackets, so I don't think I have to read so much to figure out what this is. When you have information in bracket, it is usually parenthetical. In other words, it is giving you a definition of a word immediately preceding it, right? So the wax can then be transformed into a surfactant, and a surfactant is now defined as a chemical compound is able. So I would say the job of the underlined sentence here is to give us a definition. Oh, it's not even a sentence on its own. Okay, it is a part of the sentence. So it gives us a definition of what surfactant is. That's my prediction. Now, to the options, I want to say it defines a term before it. Option A says it clarifies the meaning of a scientific term. This makes a lot of sense. The scientific term obviously is that term we have the surfactant. So this is the reason I'm going for this answer, but hold on to it and see whether the others do not work at all. Option B, it describes an environmental consent. Totally off. It explains the significance of a scientific discovery. That does not point to anything like that. Option D, it identifies the results. No, that is not it. Now, the temptation to read beyond what is necessary is actually there, but then if you read all the information around the underline, you should know that whenever you have something in brackets, whenever you have details in two commas, you should know that they are trying to provide you a definition of a term or a definition or clarification on the sentence preceding them. So yes, answer has to be option A. Another question type, something entirely new. Yes, this is a specific detail. How do I know? Which statement about M. robustus and the octopus garden is best supported in the passage? So let's see what are our keywords. If you've been following my previous videos, I'm sure this will not be new to you, the idea of getting keywords on specific detail questions. So we have M. robustus and octopus garden. So I want to go and see where they mention these terms and what relationship is established between them. So we have it here. In 2018, scientists discovered an immense aggregation of M. robustus along a hydrothermal vent 3,200 meters beneath the ocean surface. Okay, this is a congregation of octopuses. That is what we see. We have not seen that idea of the garden. So moving on, we now have that water temperatures at this site named the octopus garden. Oh, this is where these octopuses are said to gather. Water temperatures at this site named climb as high as 11 degrees centigrade, much warmer than the ambient 1.6 degrees centigrade, typical of this depth. Based on observations made over 3 years, scientists concluded that this information has to be also important with relation to those terms we were trying to clarify the relationship they have between them. Concluded that temperatures at the site likely confer reproductive benefits, that the site is used exclusively for reproduction. I have seen my answer. So the relationship, I have seen between M. robustus and this octopus garden is the fact that the garden served a reproductive function for the octopuses. And more details, we have 6,000 M. robustus adults, hatchlings and eggs were observed at the garden, but no juveniles. No juveniles. I mean, I'm thinking juveniles in this context has to be those that are grown and can move around on their own. But when they are at the egg stage and of course hatchling stage, they needed this kind of environment. So my answer should be that the M. robustus needed this environment to be able to nurse their eggs before maturity, sort of. Anything that rephrase that information should be my answer. Option A gives us M. robustus leave the octopus garden upon reaching an intermediary stage of development. This rephrases that idea of reproduction as I have seen. See, upon reaching an intermediary stage. So that is justified by this information here about the scientists finding hatchlings and eggs, but no juveniles. So the juvenile stage is of course the stage at which the eggs of course have hatched and they can move around, right? The offspring can move around on their own. So that is said to be an intermediary stage. That makes a lot of sense. So we want to hold on to that. Option B, the M. robustus population at the octopus garden remains stable despite variations in the water temperature. So the water temperature were just put there just to make this test lengthy, if you ask me, because I can't see any relationship the temperature has to the animals, right? In fact, the relationship we have established is between the animals and that warmth provided. Okay, I think the temperature idea has to do with the warmth provided for reproductive purposes, but of course The idea of whether octopus, the organism remains at a stable population is not the point, as you can see in the text. Option C, M robustus nests on the octopus garden contain on average fewer than larger eggs. Okay, the number of eggs was not determined. This is wrong. The octopus garden provides an ideal feeding. No, it provides rather an ideal reproductive environment, not an ideal feeding. So you know, reproduction and feeding are two different things. Reproduction is the ability to produce offspring. Feeding is, of course, giving food to the offspring. So we don't have that detail about giving food to the offspring in the text. Best answer, option A. Moving on, I want an entirely new question type. Okay, this is inference. What does the text most strongly suggest about the story of Hans Castorp? Now, this is not a typical kind of logically complete in the text question where we are supposed to complete a blank, right? This one requires us to do something even more simple. We have to focus a lot more on the story of Hans Castorp. It is something I like to refer to as specific inference. So you will read the information about the story of Hans Castorp, which happens to be the keyword we have for this question, and of course make a deduction, being careful not to go so far, not to stray so far from the information provided in the text. So we have here that the story of Hans Castorp that we intend to tell here, not for his sake. So the story of Hans Castorp, right, is not told for his sake, Hans Castorp. For the reader will come to know him as a perfectly ordinary. So he's an ordinary person. So we are seeing information about the story of Hans Castorp, right? The story of Hans Castorp tells the story of an ordinary person. If engaging, is an engaging young man anyway, for the sake of the story itself. So let's try to read off those non-essential details. And I tell you the information bordered by two brackets and see whether we can understand this a lot better. The story of Hans Castorp we intend to tell here. Not for his sake, but for the sake of the story itself. So the story is valuable. Now what I can see, right? Which seems to us to be very much worth telling. So of course we see the information of the story being valuable still. A story worth telling. Although in Hans Castorp's favor, it should be noted that it is a story, okay, a unique story. Although in Hans Castorp's favor, it should be noted that it is his story and that not every story happens to everybody. So this is a unique story told about this particular man that is ordinary, a unique, important story. So moving on, is a story that took place long ago and is, so to speak, covered with the pattern of history and must necessarily be told with verbs whose tense is that of the deepest past. So obviously, the information I can deduce from the story of Hans Castorp here is as follows. Number one is an ordinary story about an ordinary man, but because of the fact that the story is unique to this person, this story is important to tell. That's what I've seen so far. The timing, yes, the history around the historical bent of the story could be captured in the right answer, but I think the most important detail we have seen so far is the fact that this story is important. It is worth telling because it is in the favor of somebody who has the story uniquely, and this person happens to be an ordinary person. Though it is true that stories of even the most uninteresting people are themselves interesting, this is too general. Stories of the most uninteresting people, we only have, remember, learn to focus on the scope of the text. Stories of even the most uninteresting, the text treats one particular story of Hans Castorp. Even though it is a story of a person of no particular importance, that part needs to make some sense. Let's whether the other part can be justified. Its age and the manner in which it therefore must be told are both indicators that the story itself is important. No, the history, the age in which the story occurred is not the reason the story has to be told. The story is worth telling. Read again. But for the sake of the story itself, which seems to us to be very much worth telling, although in Hans Castorp's favor. So it is worth telling because it is a good story in itself, because it is a story unique to an individual. So it is not worth telling because of the age or manner in which it has to be told. So that detail makes that answer wrong. Half true, half wrong answer. C, like all stories about the livelihoods, like all stories. So there's no comparison to any other kinds of stories. So C is wrong. It is a remarkable story that happened to an unremarkable person. This makes sense. Though one could possibly argue that because the story is valuable, some of its value accrues to the person at its center. beautiful. The story is a worth-telling story. It points to what? That idea of the story being valuable, right? And some of its value accrues to the person at the center. Although in Hans Castop's favor, it should be noted that it is his story. So you see, the story is valuable because of the person for whom it is about. So you see, option D is a perfect answer. The next question to try, let's try out, yes, a quant command of evidence question. I think this will be pretty easy. According to the graph, about what percentage of participants mentioned cost in interview. Now, a lot of times for quantitative command of evidence, I find it a lot easy. We don't have any blank to fill. We don't even have to read a claim. The claim happens to be in the question in itself. Listen again. According to the graph, about what percentage of participants mentioned cost. I'll just go and look for what percentage of participants mentioned cost. And of course, if you watch my previous video on this topic, you should understand by now how to read your graph. So obviously, the percentage of participants that mentioned cost, which is reflected by this gray, the lighter gray we have here, is 50%. So D should be your answer. See, that's easy. The next question, okay, I want to treat this because the options are quite lengthy, and when the options are quite lengthy, it can be off-putting. Do not be discouraged by the length of the options. Trust me, whenever I find the options this lengthy, I already guessed that it is even easier for that reason. So the question, we are supposed to, which quotation from the philosopher's analysis of the politics would best support the student's claim? So let's go and figure out what the student's claim is. Remember, if you followed the previous video on this topic, this should be pretty easy. You want to come straight to where the student made a claim. Towards it at the end of the text. You typically find that at the end or at the beginning. But in this case, the students claim that in particular, Aristotle asserts that in a healthy state, obedience to law must be as close to absolute as possible, and that even minor infractions should not be ignored. It's part to get all parts of the claim. The first part is that obedience to law must be absolute. That there is no excuse for disobeying the law. That's the first part, clearly understood now, I am sure. And that even minor infractions, that means minor disobedience, should not be ignored. So let's go and see what option, right, supports that claim. Notice that I didn't have to read the other parts because the claim in itself is independently clear. When constructing his argument regarding the characteristics of well-functioning government, Aristotle asserts that transgressors, which of course disobedience to law, creeps in unperceived and at last ruins the state. This makes some sense already. Even minor infractions must not be ignored. Illustrating this idea with a comparison to frequent small expenditure slowly and almost imperceptibly chipping away at imperceptible. That means it's almost unnoticeable. This minor disobedience to law, how they chip away at the fortune until it is ultimately depleted. So you see how this information now supports that Aristotle's claim about minor infractions not being ignored, and you see that information illustrated here clearly, and we see sort of the consequences of ignoring minor infractions. Let's look at the other options anyway, but I think at this point I'm holding on to this, but with a pinch of salt. When Aristotle writes on the necessity of avoiding corruption in government, he proposed that every state should be so administered and so regulated by law that its magistrates cannot possibly make money. No, the idea of making money is totally off the context. When Aristotle considers the health of constitutions, he states that constitutions are preserved when their destroyers are at a distance, and sometimes also because they are near. For the fear of them makes the government keeps in hand the fear of the destroyers. We don't see the idea of the fear of the destroyers or how close or far away the destroyers are from the constitution or from the place where the constitution takes effect. Option D, when contrasting different forms of government, Aristotle holds that oligarchies may last not from any inherent stability in such forms of government, but because the rulers are on good terms both with the unenfranchised and with the government, the rulers being on good terms, that in no way supports the claim about minor infractions, minor disobedience to law not being ignored. So I've successfully limited the order, which leaves us with option A. Crystal clear. Okay, let's move on quickly to another question type. Note the question types I have treated so far so that you can take a second look at my strategies and apply them. Okay, the inference question that I love so much, right? Get each part of the text, and remember, your answer can be in either of two locations. It's either the first claim made in the text or the claim immediately preceding the blank. That is dependent on whether you have a contrast or not. So if you have a contrary detail after the first claim, right, the best answer is likely going to conform to that contrary detail. It is going to reflect or sort of rephrase that contrary detail. But if you don't have any contrary detail before the blank, the best answer will likely just restate the main claim, the earlier claim you saw. So getting the first claim is paramount. Now, narwhals are shy whales that live in the remote Arctic Ocean. Some of them have a long tusk, like a unicorn horn with sensitive nerves. So I can see some details. Some of them have long tusk, and they are a shy kind. I've seen two details, but I don't know which is the main point as it stands. Depending on what I see after, right, I can now determine what is the main point, because getting the main point is paramount, remember, to getting your answer. So shy whale, the shyness of the whales, is that the point, or the fact that some of them have long tusk? Now let's read further. Narwhals are known for this tusk. Okay, of course, position of the tusk seems to be the main point, but notice that contrary conjunction rather. Many actually don't have one, and its purpose is unknown. So I've gotten the first part of the text now. Some narwhals have a long tusk, but many don't have, and the function is not known. So hold on to that. Right? That is the first thing we had. That's the first claim we have seen. Some of them have a long tusk, many don't have. We don't know the function. Now, one group of scientists came up with a possible purpose in 2014. That means the purpose of the long tusk. The scientists suggested that the tusk may help narwhals determine when water around them is likely to start freezing and become dangerous for them. So it has a function finally. So function has been determined. So my answer at this point, just to walk you through my thought process, so at this point I'm thinking my answer will be in line with this idea of this tusk being important. The purpose of the tusk now has been confirmed. But let's see that we have a new detail. Marine biologist Christine Ladru disagrees with this idea, though. So there's a contrary information. There's a new detail, which should, of course, is pointing to the fact that my answer might just be this last information. She reasoned that if the narwhal's tusk serve as an important purpose, then it's most likely that, yes, then they will mostly have it. Yeah. So the point of the text is about the purpose of the tusk. And remember the first claim we got, that some of them have it. Not all of them have it. Now, when it was first determined that there is a purpose for it, we were able to predict that, it has a purpose, which justifies why some of them have it. But then we are now told that there's a disagreement, which is that, yes. Marine biologist Christine Ladris disagrees with this idea. She reasons that if the narwhal's tusk serves as an important purpose, then it's most likely that most of them should have it. That's my prediction. Simple. Some narwhals would seek a new habitat. Now we see the information about habitat. You're tempted to choose the kind of answer if you think too much outside the text. There's no information. You can look through the text. Is there any word that rephrases habitat, environment, where they live? No, so that makes the answer wrong. Option B, fewer marine animals. Remember, like we walked through the previous question on inference, what is the scope? Is the scope about marine animals in general, or a particular kind of marine animal? So you have to always determine the scope. So because this is too generic for the scope of the passage, this is wrong. C, more narwhals would have a tusk. Beautiful. We can see the idea of fewer narwhals, some of them have a long tusk. So you see, and the idea of tusk is well captured too as the main idea of the test. So C, perfect answer. Option D, narwhals would become less shy. Of course, you see, I was able to tell me from the get-go that shyness is not the point of the text, but it was just mentioned there in passing. And throughout the text, they didn't make any mention of shyness anymore. So of course, shyness is too specific a detail to guide to determine that answer. So we've dealt with all major reading comprehension questions. Now let's move on to the English convention questions, right? From the options, you can tell. Notice that from the reading comprehension, because I didn't have to look at the options first. It's important for you to get the text, have a sense of what your answer should look like before dealing with the options. But for the English conventions, you have to look at the options, because looking at the options lets you know what topic it's tested. So A, B, C, D here for number 19 points to the fact that this is testing us for verb agreement. Notice the singular verb we have here and the plural verb. So once I see a singular verb and a plural verb in my options, I can tell this is testing me for subject verb agreement. And you know the rule around that. A subject of a sentence is singular, the verb should be singular. The subject is plural, the verb should also be plural. And you should know what determines plural verbs and singular verbs, especially for active verbs like this. Apart from the plural of is being are, the plural of has been have, which are common linking verbs. But for active verbs, you should know that when your verb takes an s in front, it indicates singularity, as opposed to your nouns. Your nouns will take an s or es in front to indicate plurality, right? But the nouns do the direct opposite. So when your nouns take an s in front, it indicates singularity. And when the verb whether takes an s in front, it indicates singularity. And when it goes without the s, it indicates plurality. So I want to immediately determine the subject of the verb. The map dash the area of a plot of land shows. So obviously the subject here is the map. The map, I want to ask, is it singular or plural? Obviously it is singular, right? So the right verb should be describes. And notice consistency. Notice consistency in that listing there. So all the other verbs there are also in the singular present tense. The map blank the area of plot of land shows, singular verb, and includes, and that singular verb, that is also another indicator that the verb you need, indicator of the kind of verb you need. So the best answer is obviously describes, option A. Another question, this is punctuation, and whenever I have a comma and a but, I'm thinking they're testing my knowledge of boundary between two independent clauses, which is not far-fetched. It is here. Leibniz wheel calculators were popular in the first half of the 20th century. That is obviously an independent clause, right? The next part, these ingenious devices were eventually replaced, another independent clause. Two complete ideas side by side. In other words, two independent clauses, and you could have a comma and a conjunction between both. Plug option C in and it makes perfect sense. Leibniz wheel calculators were popular in the first half of the 20th century, comma, but these ingenious devices were eventually replaced. So you see, comma and the conjunction working comfortably between two independent clauses. If you want to be sure this is correct, you can try in the semicolon. So you replace the comma and the conjunction with a semicolon. If it works, then that answer is correct. Or you replace with a full stop. If you replace the comma and the but and put a full stop and just change the T for these to capital letter, that also makes perfect grammatical sense. It means comma and the but is also correct, because the comma and the conjunction, the semicolon and the full stop are synonymous on the SAT. They do the exact same function of coming between two independent clauses. Moving on to another, this is quite easy. This is pronouns. From the options you can tell one, that, these. So I want to determine the subject, the antecedent of the pronoun. What is the noun the pronoun is pointing to? Is that noun singular, in which case this, this will be the answer. If the pronoun is plural, if the noun referred to is plural, then the answer should be these, these. So let's determine what the pronoun, the antecedent, the noun reference is. 18 letters written by Louisa May Alcott, author of the popular Read Off Non-Essential. This information, but by two commas, is just there to confuse your life. Read it off. 18 letters written by Louisa May Alcott can be found at the New York Historical Society. So full stop. Dash letters demonstrate obviously these letters. 18 letters, remember? And I think reading of that non-essential information contributed to me not forgetting what the subject of that pronoun is. Okay, another sentence type. Okay, this is testing your knowledge of tenses. Obviously, look at characterize, has been characterized, will characterize. Tenses. So you want to go and notice what is the development. Are they discussing the present tense occurrence or discussing the past tense occurrence? Other verbs around the blank will tell. So featuring jagged peaks of black ink surrounded by hazy swells of blue and green. Zhang's 1983 painting is inspired. So obviously this is talked about in the present tense, and this is typical of artworks. Whenever the content of artworks are talked about, right? Talk about shows, TVs, books, you do so in the present tense, right? By direction of, okay, a type of Chinese, okay, oh, there's a switch, obviously. A type of Chinese landscape that has moved on to something we can say is historical now. So I'm thinking I need a past tense, obviously. A type of Chinese landscape painting dashed by the use of blue and green hues, obviously, characterized. Notice the switch from discussing the painting to discussing the origin of the tradition. See? So you would typically have this on the SAT. On this kind, on verb tenses question, you typically have a switch. But one thing is common, right? Consistency of your verb. So the other verbs will determine the right verb to choose for the blank. But notice when there could be a drift from talking about something in the present tense, talking about a historical happening or something in the past. Yes. Let's move quickly. Okay, this is a new question right here. Which choice complete that it conforms to English conventions? Oh, once I look at this option, the longest of the options among your English convention questions is indicative that the topic tested is modifiers. And for modifiers, you want to be sure that you are placing the right subject in front of the modifying phrase, which typically begins the sentence. So the modifying phrase we have here is wanting to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Alaska purchase. So I'm asking the question, who wants to celebrate? That is what that is the inclination that you would get. That is what should come to your mind once you see a modifying phrase that begins the sentence. It typically leaves you asking, what or who is this describing? Is this phrase describing? So seeing this already, wanting to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Alaska purchase, I'm thinking, what? Who rather? Right? That who, that right subject should be placed immediately after the comma. I'm trying to say this in the most layman term as possible so that you really understand if you haven't learned this topic before. So the right option to choose now should be an option that introduces a perfect who for that modifying phrase that begins with that subject. So A said a contest sponsored by Alaska. This cannot work. Wanting to celebrate. So it is not a contest that wants to celebrate. So A is wrong. An award of $300. No, it is not an award that is wanting to celebrate. $300, the same thing as option B. Very wrong. Option D, the Alaska Centennial Commission. Obviously, this is a commission. So it makes sense for the commission wanting to celebrate. So you see, you pay particular attention to the subject, to the nouns that start each of the options, and see which one matches in terms of logic, right, with the modifying phrase coming before the blank. Yes, let's move on to another question type. This is transitions, and for transitions, I read the first sentence and I read the sentence after the blank and I establish connection. I determine whether they are both contradicting details or they are both connecting details. If they are both contradicting details, it means I will have to eliminate all my connecting transitions. Otherwise, I would have to eliminate all the contradicting transitions. So guard cells are specialized that are part of plant spores. I don't think we have really so much of that detail. These cells help regulate. So this is the first point, helping to regulate the amount of carbon dioxide a plant takes in. So this is the function of the guard cells. The next part, they help regulate, there is connectivity. So obviously, instead is of previously, which indicates a previous occurrence, is off. B and D are totally off. In conclusion, no. In conclusion, we typically summarize a passage or summarize a paragraph, right? And we should have had at least many more details before the last detail after the blank for in conclusion to work. So obviously, this is option A. Additionally, giving you an additional function that the guard cells performs to the earlier mentioned function. Moving on to a new question type. This is the easiest of them all. A student who wants to identify what type of scientist Chudbury is. So I don't think I have to look at the bullet points. I just want to see that Chudbury is Chudhuri rather is a scientist, and what what his or her specialty is. Chalk is the type of top, totally off. Chalk from where to where. Option B, some scientists study shale. Chalk, no. Talking about other scientists. I want to see Choudhury. There are scientists who study sediment. No, sediment. So Choudhury is a sedimentologist. Perfect. Perfect. I don't even have to look at the options for this. If you look at the bullet points anyway, you will see it is restated there. Yes, the second bullet point, Choudhury studies sedimentary rocks. Perfect. So just to be sure that we are not leaving any stone unturned. Let's try one more. Something a little more technical, because I consider that one a lot easy. Okay, this one is lengthy. I consider it to be a little more technical than the other one. The student wants to contrast the two styles of tiles. Oh, now let me get into my head and predict what this should look like. They will have a contrast. So it means that I'm looking for words like however, although, while, to establish that two things are not the same. Right? They'll mention one kind of styles and mention another and tell us they are different in some way. Option A, tiles in the Majolica and Arista styles can be found in the Royal Alcazar of Seville. This makes both kinds of tiles look the same. They have the same origin, totally off. Option B, featuring tiles in the Majolica and Arista style. The Royal Alcazar of Seville in Spain is famous. No, this is talking rather about the function of the Royal Alcazar in Spain. This is not what we're looking for. In the Arista style, the designs are stamped into the ceramic style, whereas in the Majolica style, I've seen two styles and I've seen a contrast word to help you establish that contrast already. Option C is the best answer. Let's just give the benefit of doubt, even though we know it is going to be wrong. Among the famous style works of the Royal Alcazar of Seville are Majolica styles made by painting. Oh, this focuses just on one kind of tiles. Tile rather. So this is wrong. So hope this is as clear as daylight, and you should practice. So there you have it. I hope that was very helpful, and I'm sure it was a little fast-paced than normal. You could of course replay the video, take a pause on major portions of the video and just take notes, and of course practice as many times as you could all the question types I have treated with the tricks I have taught you today, and relax and feel a lot more confident, because all the information you gathered here today will help you in more ways than one.